There's a sentence that came to my mind this week that it was what I was thinking about is that the world is just so loud right now. It just kept coming to mind. And, it feels at times as if the world is screaming because there's so much going on, and we just have to really acknowledge that. We live in the world. We have to acknowledge it. There's the destruction in Gaza and the other wars and all the violence, Sudan and Yemen and Congo and Myanmar and nameless other places. And then there's all the other things that are happening. There's the homeless crisis and inflation and economic injustice and the mass shootings, really almost on a daily basis, and racial injustice, white supremacy. I mean, those things are mainstream these days. It's really extraordinary. So much hatred is becoming mainstream. And so there's the world at large, climate, and then there's our own personal experiences that we're having. There's, loss. I had a friend die suddenly this week, very unexpectedly. And I know a lot of other folks who have had big losses, diagnoses, so on and so forth. And, it's really a lot. And it seems like every few weeks I seem to recite this same litany of how greed and hatred and ignorance are, showing up in our world. And sometimes there can be a sense of despair that shows up. It's really a feeling of like, oh my goodness, this is so much. Or there can be that, and there's also sometimes this inclination to just check out, like stick our fingers in our ears or stick our heads in the sand. And we are offered so many shiny things to look at in this world to keep our eyes averted. And, I understand that tendency. It can seem so overwhelming to digest everything that's going on. And we really are suffering from information overload. If you think about it, we can get more information in an hour than somebody 150 years ago got in their entire lives. I mean, it's extraordinary, the exponential growth of information and technology that we're working with. And yet our nervous system can't keep up, yet we think we're bombarded by this stuff. So it's really important that we recognize that and we take care of ourselves. And, I keep up with what's going on. I read, I watch, I do that. I'm deeply impacted by it. I think I cry pretty much on a daily basis sometimes. And, I've been doing a lot of other reading as well to broaden my understanding of the world, but I also take care of myself. I read silly murder mysteries, and I watch silly TV programs with my husband, and I play with my cats, and I go for walks in nature and talk to friends and really kind of nourish myself. There's a book I have over here that I haven't read yet, but the title is called Rest is Resistance, and it's by a woman named Tricia Hershey, who's also known as the Nap Minister. She has what she calls a Nap Ministry, and she says that, resting and taking care of ourselves is not a luxury. It's actually a necessity. So to recognize that that's really important, to take care of ourselves. But there's a difference between taking care of ourselves and just kind of moving into this place of delusion and ignorance, checking out altogether, just numbing ourselves, which I have also done a great deal of in my life. This practice asks us to take care of ourselves, but also to be as present as best we can, And what also came up for me this week is the importance of love. Really the importance of love in this whole dynamic, this whole picture. It's usually not the first emotion we feel when we're surrounded by so much awful news. There's rage, there's grief, there's sadness, there's helplessness, anxiety, disgust, so on. I mean, we also have joy in our lives. I have to we have to state that it's not all doom and gloom. There's both. There's the worldly wins, there's the pleasure, there's the pain, there's the gain, there's the loss. It all happens, and the invitation is to be present with all of it, And when we do have those really uncomfortable feelings, the anger, the grief, or the sadness, it can spur us to want to do something, to help in some way, to take care of, the sense of injustice. But it's often driven by the sense of injustice or anger, but it's also driven by compassion, which is connected to love. And to lift up love in a time like this is so important, because it's so easy to lose our awareness of our shared humanity and our connection. And the Buddha talked about it. He talked about, we sit imbued with a heart 1/4 full of kindness, loving kindness, goodwill, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity. So that it's part of how we move through the world. The Buddha talked about that many, many, many times in the suttas. And so it's part and parcel of his teachings. And so it really is important for us to bring our awareness back to that, or to bring it into our awareness, especially when we're so overwhelmed by really awful things. This week I read The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, and he is scathing in his indictment of white supremacist culture of the U.S., but he is also adamant about the importance of love. He's obviously not in denial either. He says in one point, it's scarcely worthwhile to attempt to remembering how many times the sun has looked down on the slaughter of innocents. This was written 62 years ago. It could have been written last week. So he has this full awareness of the experience of the world. But he also says, and this is one of the many times he stresses the importance of love, but what was the point, the purpose of my salvation, if it did not permit me to behave with love towards others, no matter how they behave towards me? That's how we keep our humanity, this connection to our heart, this connection to each other. Another quote of his, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. And isn't that so true? Hatred, anger, it's such an armor. It keeps us from feeling the deep grief, it can be a scary place to go. Anger and rage is an energizing experience, whereas grief is just, we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to open our hearts. It's a scary place, especially if we've been hurt, and we've all been hurt. We've all been hurt. So the inclination is to protect ourselves. That's oftentimes exactly the problem. There is so much pain associated with our world that's opening up to it seems like insanity. We want to keep ourselves protected, but as Baldwin said, hatred becomes too heavy a sack to carry. And the Buddha also stressed this. He stressed the absolute necessity of turning towards love. The Metta Sutta was given to monks as an antidote to fear. They were terrified by the devas, the celestial beings, when in the forest, and they ran to the Buddha, and the Buddha said here, and the Metta Sutta is about showing loving kindness and goodwill to all beings, opening our hearts to all beings. And then there's the famous line in the Dhammapada, which says, hatred never ceases through hatred, only through love. So the Buddha is talking about this all the time. And there's a very famous sutta called the Simile of the Saw. And I'll read a piece out of this sutta. The Buddha says, monks, Even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, he among you who let his heart get angered, even at that would not be doing my bidding. Even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected and we will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic, with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. We will keep pervading these people with an awareness imbued with goodwill, compassion, joy, equanimity. And beginning with them, we will keep pervading the all-encompassing world with an awareness imbued with goodwill, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. That's how you should train yourselves. So those are the words of the Buddha. Even if somebody's hacking off your arms and legs, do not turn to hatred. Now, that being said, this is obviously an enlightened being's response, and I'm not there. I'm guessing that many of you are not there. Our emotions will arise. They're just a normal reaction to our experience. We are conditioned beings, deeply conditioned beings. So it's a huge task, but one that's so worthy because hatred is too big a burden to bear. That's a quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It's a huge task, and one that may take years and years. It may take a lifetime if we ever get there. But it's an important path because aversion, hatred, is one of the defilements. It's something that keeps us from liberation. It keeps us off the path to liberation. The Buddha said we need to cultivate goodwill. Goodwill, metta, translated as loving kindness, goodwill, friendliness. We have to cultivate that, I don't want to be glib about love, but it's really important to look at it, to bring it into our awareness as a path, as perhaps an aspiration. It may seem 1,000 miles away from us, but it's an aspiration, something that we move towards. When we carry these difficult emotions like hatred and rage, anger, we become chained to them. They're toxic, they're heavy, they get in our way, they drag us down, and they do nothing. If we're in hatred and anger towards the other person, carrying this, we're the ones who are suffering. It does nothing to the other person. So can we set our sights on a path to an open heart, a loving heart, while taking care of ourselves? So we often say we invite people into our hearts, but not into our homes. We're wise. We have wisdom, because this is a path of wisdom and compassion. They call it the two wings of awakening. We see clearly. This person is not wise. This person is not skillful. This person is causing harm. I'm not shutting my heart down to them, but I'm keeping them at arm's length because it doesn't serve me to allow them into my life. But we don't harden our hearts. It's so easy to demonize people. It's so easy to decide that they are they or them, not human beings, but them. And when they become them or they lose their humanity. We dehumanize them. Demonize them, we dehumanize them. And I talk about this all the time, but it's really important because I still do it. I do it myself. I have a few categories of they, and I find myself falling into it, and then I go, come back. Don't, really it takes the effort, the awareness, the willingness to let go, because a lot of this anger is really righteous. They'd stop doing it or whatever. But can I come back? Can I come back? there's such an onslaught of awfulness right now. We need to be reminded of the importance of goodwill, friendliness, love. You know, I have a friend, and I've mentioned this before. She lives in Syria. She lives in Damascus, and I saw her in September, and I talked about the wanting to love everyone, and she said, "No, I hate a lot of people. There are people who are worthy of hate," and I can't tell her she's wrong. I can. She lives in a world where she's been in civil war for 14 years or longer. She has her experience. We could talk about this idea of compassion, but it's like I don't go around going, no, you're wrong, but she has to hold that. And so it's hard because we have our conditioning. And if you're finding this idea hard, recognize that it's hard, but as I said, you hold it as an aspiration, as a place to move towards. We do have grief. It's important to recognize these difficult emotions that arise. The grief is the heart's natural response to loss, and we grieve to allow ourselves to feel the truth of our pain. It allows us to acknowledge and integrate the pain, and it takes courage. That's love. This willingness to be present, to open our hearts, to be vulnerable. They talk about a lot the undefended heart. That's what it is, because the armoring is what keeps us from that connection. Baldwin has another quote. He said, "I use the word love here not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth." Love is empowering. It allows us to open, to be present. It's part of this. It's as the Buddha said, we can be open to people who are cutting our legs off. We don't have to hide. We can be with the difficulty of the moment. That's what we do when we meditate. We practice being present for the unpleasant, for the uncomfortable, letting go of our attachment to shoulds and coulds and woulds, and we open to what's right here. We may work to change things that are causing harm, but we don't shut ourselves off to the emotions that show up, the grief, the sadness. The Buddha didn't ask us to sing Kumbaya, but instead to be present with the full range of our experience. This is the first noble truth. This is part of the teachings, the first noble truth. There is dukkha. There is birth, there is death, there is loss, there is sickness, there is grief, there's longing, lamentation. We lose everything we care about. It's going to happen. How do we turn towards that? The second noble truth is the cause of our extra level of suffering is our inability to be with that. Wanting what we want when we want it, this discontent with the way things are. But the Buddha said, can you show up for reality? That's what we're being asked to do. Can you show up with the depth of your sadness and not harden your heart? Still stay open. He gave us a roadmap to be in community with others, the Eightfold Path. That's how we be in harmony with others. And right view, the first factor, is seeing things clearly. Right now, it's like this. And the second factor is intention. And this is what I was talking about in aspiration. The intention is to let go of what doesn't serve us, let go of what causes suffering, and to move through the world with goodwill and compassion, metta, loving kindness, goodwill, friendliness. Not a hardened heart, not armor to protect ourselves, but an open-heartedness, a willingness to be present. And then the Sila portion of the Eightfold Path, the living with integrity, enables us to be in community with others without causing harm. Be in community with ourselves without causing harm. No? We are part of the world. We're not masters of the world. We're just all interconnected. That's that's what I always laugh. People think there's nature and then there's human beings, not recognizing that human beings are part of nature. And in fact, there's a quote I have from Neil deGrasse Tyson that I want to read, if you know who he is, the astrophysicist. And he talks about, when we talk about interconnectedness, Thich Nhat Hanh talked about interbeing, how we are all related to each other. Neil deGrasse Tyson says, the atoms of our bodies are traceable to stars that manufactured them in their cores and exploded these enriched ingredients across our galaxy billions of years ago. For this reason, we are biologically connected to every other living thing in the world. We are chemically connected to all molecules on Earth, and we are atomically connected to all atoms in the universe. We are not figuratively, but literally stardust. So it's not a woo-woo thing to say we're stardust. We are actually connected to every other living thing. And even closer to that, I can't create the internet on my own. I can't build this house I'm living in. I can't do Zoom on my own. We need each other. And so to cultivate that recognition of our shared humanity is incredibly important. Incredibly important. Recognizing we're part of the world. So not to set up a barrier between us and others. Audre Lorde says, we have to consciously study how to be tender with each other until it becomes a habit. Because we're reactive because of our conditioning. We've all been harmed. We've all been hurt. We don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be harmed again. So we're protecting ourselves from the grief, from the sadness, from the hurt. But the Buddha says, can we instead turn towards bringing love? And Bell Hooks has a whole bunch of quotes around love, and I'm going to share a couple of them because they're really powerful. And she said, the moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is the testimony of love as the practice of freedom. So this practice of love is a practice of liberation, and it's so powerful. And she said, to be loving is to be open to grief, to be touched by sorrow, even sorrow that is unending. Even sorrow and grief that is unending. Right now, it's like this. We don't have to hide. We don't find liberation without opening up to the reality of this moment. Holding the grief, holding the sadness, taking care of ourselves, but not turning into a being that hates others, that carries these toxic emotions around. They're going to show up. They're absolutely going to show up. But how you hold them is where the practice is. Remember when anger showed up a few years ago for me around some stuff, and it just kind of moved into my chest. And instead of saying, I am angry, because it's when we put it on, go, I am, then it takes over. But if we can just say, oh, there's anger. Here it is. It's a reaction to what's going on. Okay, but it's not going to run my life. It's not going to take over. I'm just going to let it sit here, acknowledge it, and go about my business without letting it run the show. That we have that clarity, that wisdom, that discernment. to see. It's because we're connected again. We're connected with our bodies. We're connected with our emotions. We don't run away from them. We turn towards, we say hi. And that's I love that story of Milarepa. He was a sage that lived, there's a lot of stories about him. He was from like a lot of Tibetan stories about him from like 1200 years ago. And when he left his cave and he came back in and it was overrun with demons, and he was angry and he threw stuff at them, and then he tried to give them a Dharma talk and try and, sway them that way. And they were just like, blah, until he finally said, okay, what do you got? Here you are. And he put his head in the mouth of the biggest and the baddest and the scariest, and they just kind of like dissipated. You have to turn towards this moment. There's no way around. I didn't get past my grief, by pounding it into the ground. I tried pounding it into the ground for a really long time, and it kept coming back. And it was when I finally said, okay, what do you got? And it's not ever what we think it is. It's always different. So make the space. The practice teaches us how to make the space. Practice teaches us to come back. The practice asks us to open our hearts to all beings, maybe starting with ourselves, because sometimes that's the most challenging. Start where you are. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Start where you are. And what gets in the way? What gets in the way of having an undefended heart, of moving through the world with love for all beings? That's a really important question. I always like to ask that question. If I have an intention to love, to move through the world with this loving, kind goodwill, what gets in the way? What gets in the way? And oftentimes we find it's stories about should and have to. And see what you can do with those stories. Maybe see where they came from. Or can you let go of the story and just tend to the emotion that's underneath? And I've heard it several times this week that anger is a secondary emotion, and often what's underneath is fear or grief or sadness. Can you maybe acknowledge that and touch what's underneath tenderly, with compassion? Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else up in my little brain. So just reflect on this reflect on this invitation to move towards this idea of having love and not turning away from anyone. But also, again, I always have to say this because somebody always asks the question about what about, and I mentioned it briefly before, if people are causing harm, it doesn't mean you go, oh, well, I have to love them. It's a recognition that we also work to end harm where it's being caused. We work to end injustice. We don't turn away from the experience of the moment. We don't say, this shouldn't be this way. Maybe it shouldn't be this way, but we don't say that with an intention of denying our feelings, denying this experience. We open to this experience, and then we say, you know what? What's causing this problem needs to be addressed. And how do we do that? So it can be a spur to taking care of business, activism in some way, shape, or form. So what gets in your way? Can you see our shared humanity? Can you set an intention to move in this direction of kindness, compassion for all beings? Can you act as if? Sometimes we just have to act as if, or speak as if, work as if, just start going in the direction. And maybe it might take the rest of my life. But I'm a lot further along than I used to be. And for that, I am extremely grateful. So I want to thank you so much, my friends, for your very kind attention. And I would really love to hear, now it's the time for comments or questions or what you, how this lands for you. Any thoughts, any rebuttals? I'm up for that too. How do you land with this recognition of the importance of love? Well, my friends, why don't we just, unless there's anything else, why don't we just sit for a few minutes and just let this percolate for a bit. So just relax. Maybe connecting with your body, with your sensations, what may be present for you right now, different emotions, different thoughts. You don't have to figure anything out, just opening to what's here and allowing yourself to soften to that. Whatever you're feeling is absolutely fine. As you settle, let your body relax. Let yourself be supported by your seat. Remembering that we practice for our benefit, but we also practice for the benefit of all beings, just as we wish for our own health, our own ease, our own peace, freedom from fear. We wish that for all beings, for our loved ones, our friends, our family, our acquaintances, people we know, people we don't know, people we like, people we don't like. We extend these wishes for well-being out to all people, all beings, wishing with an open heart. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free. Thank you again, my friends, for being here. I'm not sure who's here next week, but there will be a class this next week. Oh, and I was just reminded what the tattoo on my hand says. It says, love more. So I guess that's it. Anyway, so next week there's class. Sunday, there's Tuesday evening, Wednesday peer-led sit, Friday metta, and then our residential retreat is happening at the end of this month. So if you're thinking about it, I invite you to check it out. And as always, if you are so inclined, I think Marisol put a link to the donation or to the donation button. Your support of ICD is deeply appreciated. It helps to support the community and support the teachers. So whatever makes sense for you, your generosity is always welcome. And Thank you, thank you, thank you again, my friends. I love you all. Absolutely. And I will see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Much love. Bye.